Hello, everybody. I hope everybody is doing well in these bizarre times. Something just kind of occurred to me. It's kind of something I wanted to talk about for a while in a little bit of detail. Is Lorne's sort of relationship with mental illnesses, depression mainly. He mentioned it, I believe, in his lawsuit. In fact, he definitely mentioned it in his lawsuit. I believe he may have touched upon it in some of the calls. And it's to try and explore, really, if he was suffering from depression. Now, just a little bit of a disclaimer, because this does pop up in videos like this. People seem to think that when I go into detail about, like, mental illnesses and bad relationships with family members and that I'm kind of like making excuses for his behaviour. That's not what I'm doing at all. I'm trying to... The purpose of these type of videos is to understand human behaviour. I'm kind of like a fucking 2-bit amateur clinical psychologist in a way, you know what I mean? I watch videos about Jordan, listening to Jordan Peterson speak, listen to his videos, which I find fascinating. I've read hundreds of books about the human condition, about depression, about the psyche. And of course, I think due to my profession as well, I think I've got a little bit of insight into it and my own personal experiences. That's why I think I can maybe have some insight into these kind of things. So it was just I don't want to go on about that too much. It's just a little disclaimer, because I understand people get a bit upset because if you're looking at it from a certain perspective and you don't actually think about what I'm talking about, you could see that it might be that I'm making excuses for people. But I think Shin put it quite well on one of the streams I'm doing. Lorne represents humanity, the darker side of humanity. Not all of it, of course. When you look at it in the grand scheme of things, it's a harmless flea, and I don't mean that to, to sort of, maybe that's understating it a little bit, of course, because we do know that there's been real victims, and harmless flea is probably not the best description. But if you think of it in terms of the, on a global scale, and who are the real villains, then he is relatively harmless in that respect. He causes the odd person a lot of misfortune, and luckily there's not been too much of it, and thanks to the generosity of this community, the TCAP community, Betty has been repaid a hell of a lot, which is fantastic. So anyway, back onto the subject matter. Has Lorne ever been depressed? I've thought about this, and it was one of my original thoughts that entered my head about his situation. The really alluring part of the whole Lorne saga was how the fucking hell did this guy sink so low? I've sunk pretty fucking low in my life, there's no doubt about that. Really stuff that I'll never disclose on here. Luckily, it never turned into, attack it. Sort of using that period in my life to exploit other people. It never got to that. I've obviously been unkind to people, and said and done things that I really regret. There's no doubt about that. But Lorne went to the extent of becoming a predator. This is the really interesting thing for me. It's like, what's the difference between somebody who suffers and decides to go inwards and suffer within themselves, or somebody who tries to turn that suffering around and exploit other people, which is the essence of a predator, what a predator's supposed to be. We all have basic human needs, right? The need for clothing, shelter, food, social connections, which is massive, what I'm going to talk about. And if we don't get those, there is a tendency to become depressed. Depression is an incredibly complex condition. It really, really is. Nobody has fully grasped it. Nobody. People have come close. I've read some fucking amazing books about it. The best book, if I can recommend to anybody that wants to learn more about these kind of things, or somebody who may be suffering from depression now or has in the past, please read a book called Less Connections by Johan Harry. It's fantastic. It's in my opinion, it's the best book about the subject. It really digs beneath the surface, and this guy didn't just sit in a room writing. This guy went out there researching ancient, well, not ancient, but sort of tribes of people that still live, under the radar of modern capitalism, shall we say. And it's a real insight into what causes it, what we can do about it. It's fantastic. Yeah, so like I said, what kind of interests me is what's the difference between somebody who suffers silently within themselves and someone who goes out of the way to exploit other people. This is where I don't see good and evil like a lot of people. This is where I have disagreements with people in the community, even friends, I don't see... You see, look at it this way, right? You've got I'm going off topic a little bit here, but I'm right. I'm like... So basically, you have someone who really feels bad about themselves, right? And they exploit other people to feel better about themselves. It's kind of the easy way out, really. Because there's always going to be someone worse off than you. Always. And there's always going to be someone better off than you. So there's always going to be, even for somebody like Lorne, right, who was a total, his life was a complete mess. Even for somebody like him, there was someone to exploit. He could go on an internet chat room and find someone where he could fulfill or try and meet his basic needs. His basic needs, one of our needs is, love, romance, whatever. That kind of intimate connection, physical intimacy, emotional intimacy is a basic human need when you develop into adulthood. That need of Lorne's wasn't being fulfilled. He couldn't find someone his own age. There's been periods, maybe not in everybody's, some who were lucky enough, but there's certainly been periods in my life where I've thought, shit, why can't I find the right person? What's fucking wrong? But it's never, I'm lucky enough, or I've had maybe, a certain life where it's never even occurred to me to exploit someone who's vulnerable to get those needs met. And I think it's kind of a wisdom that I possess, and that's not an egotistical thing. But I always knew that ultimately, if I did that, what's the fucking point? Because if you're in that position, you need to work through those. You need to figure out what it is that's stopping you. So, in other words, in Lorne's situation, right, his life was a mess, and his needs weren't getting met. So he needed to figure out a way to unmess his life, to get to a decent place within himself, to get mentally sound, and clean himself up. If you do that, generally the universe will help you out, and someone will turn up. Or something will help you. I'm a great believer that if you're in the right place mentally, the right thing will happen. Not always. I can't account for everything. But generally speaking, it's like I think back to when I went through a really shitty time. Like, we all have bad breakups and that, but mine was a little bit complicated. You know what it's like with fucking families and children and all that kind of stuff. So I remember back to that time, and just out of nowhere, I met all these different people. It was kind of a crazy coincidence that people appeared in my life that helped me through it. They're not in my life anymore. They were like there for a short time. I used to speak to them every single day when I was going through this bad time, and I know that if they weren't there when that was happening, I'd have been fucked. Like, really. I don't even, I dread to think what the situation, what I would have been like. So the universe will generally gives you what you need for the evolution of your consciousness. That's what it's really all about. You know, you can try and figure out the purpose of life in that. It's not to sit on your ass and watch fucking TV all the time. It's to try and do things and grow as a person. It doesn't mean that you have to become a CEO of the biggest company in the world. That's not... Money isn't... Money is a byproduct. The real accomplishment is fine, ambition is fine if it comes from the right place, as long as you do not seek power over other people. There's nothing wrong with any of that. It's when you do that it becomes dysfunctional. So I went inwards, did a lot of work on myself, and managed to get out of a bit of a rut, whereas Lorne thought, I know what I'll do, I'll exploit children. Now, I don't think he sat down, right? I don't think he sat down with a pen and a piece of paper and thought, right, I'm fucked, what do I do? Kids, I know what I'll do. I don't think it's like a totally premeditated act. It is premeditated, but what I mean is it's not some kind of evil master plan where he sat down and thought, how can I commit the most evil? He doesn't think like that, and that goes in tandem with what I'm talking about with regard to his mental illness, or lack of, shall we say. He just rolls with it. You're kind of thinking, right, okay, it's not... He doesn't stop to think and sit down and plan things. He's an impulsive creature, as we all are to some degree, but he lacks introspection and really taking responsibility. I know we harp on about this all the time, but it's so fundamentally important to his situation, is the lack of responsibility. It's a massive thing for everybody, more than you would ever believe. You know, it's read a book called Inner Engineering by Sadhguru. Brilliant. Really talks about the importance of personal responsibility. And personal responsibility isn't just responsibility with regard to your actions and how you treat other people. You've got internal responsibility to manage your emotions, to not hate people for no reason, to not judge people. That's massive. Not compare. It really takes a lot of self-discipline. That's something I've struggled with and still do. It's a real battle. So Lorne kind of, as many people do like him, is of a certain level of consciousness and a really low... There's different ways of saying this. Low vibrational frequency, if you want to get new agey about it. Or I prefer to say low level of consciousness. Shin put it greatly in a video once. He said it's kind of like studying a Neanderthal. I think he said, or primate, one of the two, I can't remember. That's why we have a fascination with Lorne. It's the darker aspect of human nature, and we can learn about ourselves. We can. This is why I don't dismiss Lorne. Some people, you got to be really careful with all this Lorneography shit, and I've seen it happen, and I see it happen to this day. Dehumanising Lorne is very dangerous. It's a really dark path that you walk down, and it's one of the challenges that you face with. He's still a human being, right? He's still... as far as the if you want to look at it from how we judge our own standard of how we conduct ourselves, or what you think you conduct yourself, of course he is a piece of shit. You know, there's no doubt about that. He's if you want to look at people on the level of what we're talking about now with regard to conducting yourself in a decent way, he's not. I can't. There's very little good in there. He doesn't. What would you define as good? Selflessness is basically as simple as that. It's doing acts for no other benefit than to help people. And you do it in a way where you don't have to tell people about it. If you have to fucking sing from the rooftop, I've seen this happen so many times. If you sing from the rooftops telling people how great you are, you know, people on Facebook, they'll donate and they've got to put it, not often, but they've got to put a post on, say, oh, I donated this and I did that. If you do that, any kind of karmal benefit... Have I just made that word up? Karmal. Karmic. I'm going to say karmic. I've just made that word up. If you... Any kind of karmic benefit that you would have is dismissed and eradicated as soon as you have to brag about it. Because the old saying, a good deed is its own reward, is Very, very true. Like, it's so true. Because what that does is it enriches you in a way that we can't quite. There's a lot. There's a lot about our existence that we can't quite scientifically understand. It's about the spirit, if you will. But it's about emptying your mind and cleansing your soul. You know where I'm like with this shit. Bear with me. So if you do a good act for no other reason than to do it, you will get rewarded. And it's a dangerous way for me to say that, because I don't want people going out there throwing coins at fucking old people hoping that God fucking gives them a Lamborghini. It doesn't work like that. But what it does do is it cleanses your being. And there's no need for you to go around. If you come from the right place, it's like all the stuff that goes on with Betty, right? People donating to her. Most people do it because they want to help her. They know that Lorne fucked her over, and they just want a little bit. And it's a great thing, really, because the community kind of like has revelled in this guy's sort of demise. But like I've said, just sort of going back to the, you got to be careful of walking down the dark path. It's why I've not been a total advocate of the catfishing, is because it can be very dangerous. I've no idea what's going on at the minute, but I'm talking about the previous things that I've heard. Well, I presume there'll always be someone somewhere that'll want to give, because Lorne's an easy target. He'll fucking believe anything. He's the perfect target for somebody who wants to, I don't know what it is. But you have to be really careful. And the reason is it's if you speak to somebody like Lorne in any capacity, unless you're a professional and you're able to detach yourself, you will get tainted with his negative vibes. It like attracts like. So when you're in someone's company who you don't like, it's not pleasant, and you feel it, and you want to be away from them. And it's not, and like does attract like. You kind of like a magnet. And that's why arseholes hang around with arseholes. So if you are dealing with Lorne and you're doing it under a ruse, and you know, unless you have a specific goal, which would be, well, even that's dangerous. I suppose what I'm trying to say is, if you dehumanise him, there's a problem there, because you're dismissing him as not being human, so therefore it doesn't matter. And it's very easy to do, and I'm not judging anybody that does it, because I've done it. We all do it. It's part of the battle within us. But it's so dangerous, because if you do that, you start to get negative emotions. It's karma. If you judge another person as evil or bad, which we all do, that feeling that you have inside you, it lives within you. You've created it. They haven't given it you. Do you think that Lorne gives a flying fuck if you think he's bad or not? He doesn't care what anybody thinks of. Well, he kind of does, but ultimately, you know, it's not going to make any difference to him. He's got his own path. The only thing that we should be concerned about is, you know, you got people like him running around, and it's never going to end in our lifetime. You're always going to get people like him, perverts, bad people, you know, predators. We can't, you know, unless you've got a specific job that targets those people, there's nothing you can do about it. All you can do is, if you see an injustice, try and help if it comes from a true place. It's like you see videos online of, I remember once there was a video on YouTube of, it was within the local area I live. I don't know exactly where it was, but it was, the title of the video on Facebook was, burglar gets what's coming to him after trying to rob a single mother on, who was at home on his own. What had happened were, this is what I gathered from it. I can't be 100% sure that this was the truth, but I'm pretty damn sure it was. This guy was completely drunk, and he'd stumbled into a back garden, right? And he was trying to get in. I think he was at the wrong house. He was completely drunk out of his face. He wasn't in a position to burgle anyone. So this guy comes up to him, Why another guy's filming on his mobile phone and fucking leathers him, and I mean leathers him. I wouldn't have liked for to get a kick in. And all the comments in the video were, that guy got what's coming to him, trying to break into that single. It's fucking this guy. I fucking hope he dies. He should have done more damage than that. I couldn't believe what I was reading, and it really highlighted how stupid and how easily led people can be. Because all it was is some person put that there was a single mum alone and he was trying to break into the house. So immediately everybody's emotions ran away with him. What? Is that what he was doing? It was frightening. I was like, oh my God, you've no idea that that's the case. There probably wasn't a single mum. I mean, if you're going to try and invoke some kind of emotion that's going to get people mad, it's single mum at home with a child. Do you know what I mean? Or fucking dogs fucking inside. It's a dog house. And they're all there looking after each other. And this guy's trying to break into fucking steal and murder innocent puppies. You know? And it just... That's the kind of thing that you've got to be really careful of. And it's... I suppose what I'm getting at is it's very easy. Too easy to exact hate on him. Does it mean... It doesn't mean that you enable his behaviour. It doesn't mean that you have to forgive him. It doesn't mean that you have to not appreciate bad things when you see them. People behave according to their level of consciousness and their mental conditioning. That's what it boils down to, really. It's like, think about when you've done something bad. Think about whether it's a physical act or an emotional thing. You've manipulated someone. You have said something really unkind. You lost your shit. Something that you would consider bad. We all have our moments. All of us. You know, it's like celebrities, they get caught out and shit. Why did you do that? Because you lost it, didn't you? You didn't know any better at that moment in time. Now, because emotions got the better of you. Somebody like Lorne lives within that frame of mind all the time. He knows that he's doing wrong, but he doesn't really care. He doesn't really care because it's too much hard work. But I believe that it's like a perfect storm, isn't it, of events that have led to create a certain psyche. He is, if you're going to categorise people into good and bad, of course he's bad. There's no doubt about that. But this is what fascinates me about all this, does he possess free will? To some degree, of course he does. He has the ability to do better than he's doing, always. But from another, he kind of doesn't. It depends. If you want to go really deep down into it, really deep as you possibly can, if you are run by your mind, your carnal mind, and you are not aware of it, and you have not done enough introspection, it will run your life. It will take over your being, and your mind will run your life, and that's why he's impulsive, because he doesn't really understand it. It's like, it doesn't mean that he can't do better. We all have the ability to do that, but until you have become aware of how your mind is running your life, and you're aware of what your thoughts are and your emotions and the negative impact it has on you, then from that aspect you don't have free will. It's all a matter of perspective, really. This is what interests me, because I haven't seen the kind of behaviour that Lorne exerts from anybody or heard about it. He feels ultimately all of it stems from one basic thing. He feels worthless deep down. He's got no integrity whatsoever. All the photos that have been circulated over time, it's fucking, wasn't there like a whole fucking Google Drive of his photos or something, and he's got there's, like I said, millions of people like him, zero integrity, zero self-worth. Because if think about that Ramona situation, right? He went back after he knew that she'd been playing with him for a year. Because he was so, a combination of things, he was so desperate for any kind of human interaction and intimacy. And that's intimacy for him, some kind of phone conversation when he didn't really know much about her life, but that's as good as it gets for him. So if you combine that with the fact that he feels shit and he's got no pride, of course he's going to go back. So I suppose what I'm trying to say is, if you feel that worthless, do you condemn someone for it? That feeling, that worthlessness that he possesses was given to him. He didn't choose to do that when he was younger. He didn't choose to be brought up in those circumstances. There was the absent father, which I've talked about. There was he was the youngest. There's no doubt he got bullied. His mum struggled to cope. He's a very sensitive kid. So many combinations of reasons, and there was a kind of, there's rumours about what happened. Well, not rumours, but he I don't want to go into it, but basically there's allegedly things that happened to him, which we'll never know the 100% truth about. But one thing can be sure, he had it tough. And I know that people, this argument really, it's another one that I find a little bit lacking in awareness. Is like, oh well, other people grow up in bad situations and they don't turn into predators. Well, of course they don't. Every situation is different and every person is different. You can't subject somebody else to somebody else's standards. And every single person is infinitely different. We all grew up in different cultures, in different areas. You grew up in an isolated area, didn't do well at school. There was like times we know he got humiliated. So if you think about his, like, he got, potentially bullied and shunned by his siblings. His father left him, and he didn't get enough attention from his mum because she was struggling. And he was an outcast at school and was humiliated. That's a recipe for disaster. That's a recipe for feeling worthless. So do we now condemn him and judge him as evil because of how he's turned out? Well, that's something that you've got to decide for yourself, of course, and decide the way that you think that, the standards that you live by. I certainly, I'm not naive. I know what people are like. I don't view him as evil. So I wouldn't condemn him, and I wouldn't attack him. I went to the courtroom. I had a bit of an inner conflict when I went to see him in court, because, like, is this the right thing to do? I'm just stood there watching him get sent down. And it wasn't... I didn't do it because I wanted to see him go down, because there was some kind of vindictive part of me. I mean, obviously, legally, I wasn't doing anything wrong. Anybody's allowed to go in the courtroom, but I still had to be sure that it was the right thing to do for me integrally. You know what I mean? Because if it isn't, karma will catch up with you. But it was an observation. Obviously, I fucking pissed my sides, which, when he started babbling on about his cooking show. But, I've got a decent sense of humour. I just couldn't help it. Because it is comical. It's so pathetic, most of what he does, and so ridiculous that, of course, it's amusing. Humour is kind of... We look at the human folly and are amused by it, and we're amused by our own actions. It's a spiritual thing, humour. And there's a lot of humour in the Lorne situation. It's ridiculous, It's very, very funny. It's because he's childlike, and children behave in a very comical way. I was going to say, innocence is generally charming. There's very little, if anything, about Lorne that's charming. But there is that kind of naivety that is comical. Naivety for his own behavior, like rather than anybody else's, um, anybody else's kind of feelings or anything like that. So anyway, the main body of what I wanted to talk about was whether I've just kind of gone off on one really. It's kind of whether Lorne. Why isn't Lorne severely depressed has always puzzled me. It's like I probably judge myself too harshly a lot of times and get down about why I made certain decisions and I could have been a better person here and why I wasn't a better person there. It's a sort of battle I've got to deal with really. He doesn't do that. And to get depressed, you have to have a certain level of introspection. I think it was Sadhguru, who was the author of Engineering I talked about. He mentioned depression. He said in order to be depressed, you have to be a deep thinker, generally. Because you have to, generally it's the thoughts. It's a bit of a vicious circle when you get depressed, or cycle, whatever. You feel the emotions take over you. The fear, not necessarily emotions of sadness, grief, or however it may manifest. It's always different. And what happens is those feelings you will then think, if you've got an overactive mind like me, your mind will then correspond with those feelings. So you're feeling like shit and you will think shit thoughts, like you're feeling really bad, and then everything you look through the lens of depression, of pain, of feeling bad about yourself, so everything looks bleak and terrible and grey. It's like, oh shit, I'm this and I'm that, and oh my god, and it's a horrible feeling, because I've been there, and it's hell basically, and you feel shit, and what happens is you think those thoughts, and that will create further negative emotions. If you want to categorize them into negative and positive, of course you can, happy and sad. So it's a vicious circle of feeling the emotion that feeds the thoughts, and the thoughts feed more emotion, and you can't get out of it. And you have to observe as well what happens in that situation is when that body, it's like an entity that lives within you. Eckhart Tolle calls it the pain body, and it's the accumulation of past pain that lives within you, which hasn't been fully resolved. And what happens is when it takes over you, there's periods where it's dormant, where it doesn't affect you, and then there's periods where it's active and it completely takes over you. And it's happened to people for hundreds of years. Like Winston Churchill called it the black dog on his shoulder, and it'd take over him. And Stephen Fry as well, he's been like a manic depressive. He talks, I love Stephen Fry, such an intelligent guy. If you like Lorne humour, watch a bit of Fry and Laurie, like a sketch series, brilliant. They have the same thing. And when you look at somebody like Stephen Fry, right? Ridiculously intelligent, ridiculously talented and successful. Author of brilliant books. Good actor, brilliant comedy writer, really, really great guy. And when he felt like that, he felt shit about himself. What he said, why can't I specialise in a specific subject? Why am I not specific to one area? It's ridiculous. But he couldn't help that. He was gonna I believe he tried to kill himself. He was definitely close to it. Just in case my American friends don't know who he is, he appeared in season 9 of 24. I'm not too sure if he'd been in many other. You might know who he is. Anyway, so when that takes over you, everything that you look through the world, and it's completely tainted in negativity. Everything I've done is bad, and like. It possesses you, and it's a kind of manifestation of where we are up to in our evolution as a species. We are at the point where our minds are our masters and not our servants, as they should be. And the mind is a brilliant servant but a terrible master, and if you're not aware of its intricacies and its tendencies, And you know, the relationship between you and your mind, you will suffer generally, and it's fucking hard to get over. It's really, it's a symptom of the modern age, and especially with the current climate, a lot of people are feeling socially isolated. People that live on their own are finding it tougher because they can't have those kind of connections. I don't think that Lorne has suffered from depression in the way that I've just explained it. I don't think that his current psyche allows him to do that. He lives in a kind of protection mode of that worthlessness that he feels. If he was truly, it's kind of remarkable, really. There is kind of a part of me that kind of, I wouldn't say admires him, but sort of, yeah, I can't think of a word. I don't respect and I don't admire, but there is a word. There is something about him, this inability to explode, you know, internally explode. I'm like, oh, fair play to him, you know. But what he does is this thing that he's created to protect himself. It's this lack of responsibility, because if he was able to take responsibility for what he'd done and his actions and really believe it was him that was in the wrong, he'd have to face up to this worthlessness, this really, I can only imagine how much of a horrible dark pit that is that lives inside him, that's been there since he was little, really. You know, it's like that video when I talked about, you know, was Lorne's absent father a catalyst for how he was, for his behaviour. And like I said, there was a couple of people that said, oh, it's ridiculous, maybe one or two. I couldn't have been any clearer than the title of the video was, is Lorne's absent father the catalyst? Did it start his path, you know, and then along the way he made lots of poor decisions? It's like I suppose I do study, really. I read books about, like, you know, look at mafia bosses, right? People that murder people for a living and things like that, and gangsters and, you know, all these type of people. Are they evil? They live a certain way and they believe that it's necessary. So, you know, it's a judgment system that humans have adopted. So when you what you would consider, it's like, look at Breaking Bad's a perfect example. Everybody watched, well, most people have watched that. Look at Walter White, right? He just got involved in a world that was very tempting. It's the temptation of the devil. You can have this, but you can have this empire, you can have all this power and respect, but in order to get it, you've got to do these bad things. And it's really probably started for him when he watched Jesse's girlfriend die. And he did it because he knew that he needed to have Jesse back. And he was crying as he was watching it because he knew. But he made a decision. Was it evil? Well, I don't know. You make that decision. He's still, I mean, this is fiction, but of course it's interesting. He's crying as he's watching. She called Jane? He's watching as he's crying his eyes out because he doesn't want. He's still an empathetic creature, but his own interests came first. So it wasn't selfless, was it? If he was going to do a selfless act, he'd have saved her immediately, and he wouldn't have even thought about it. So he made a decision, and it was a fucking terrible one. And look at what happened to him. Look at all the it's like when the kid died, when Todd shot the child, and then Jesse's distraught about it, absolutely mortified beyond belief, and Walter just carries on whistling, and he's like, "What the fuck? It didn't even affect you." It's decisions that you make, and you might not even be aware of it. You know what I mean? It's like I think there was a bit as well at the end where you're really not going to get this if you've not seen Breaking Bad, have you? Do you remember where he goes back to the house? I think it might have been the penultimate episode. He goes back to the house where Skylar is, and Skylar picks up a knife, and he ends up wrestling with her and the son, Walt Jr. They're like terrified holding this knife, and he stood there, and And at that point, there was a bit of introspection, and he was able to look at himself and think, "Oh my fucking god, what have I become?" Do you know what I mean? He's like, he'd realised, look at them, these people. I've done all this to protect. His initial goal was to protect his family. It had a justifiable goal, what you would certainly consider. What's more important than protecting your own family? And he did it with that plan. You know, that intention. That was what did it, because he's dying of cancer and he wanted to provide for them. But he realised that, well, Luke, what I've done, you know, I've done all this for them, and I've turned into some creature that they despise, and it was all a waste of time ultimately. So all that money was irrelevant, even if they were billionaires. It's irrelevant if they hate their husband and father. And it's, you know, he was able to step out of that, and he had enough wisdom and enough intelligence to realise Lorne, comparing Lorne to Walter White, brilliant. Lorne doesn't have enough intelligence and wisdom to see shit like we do. He's not totally numb, but this is the thing: if you get people that grow up, and maybe the genetics are not, you know, they're not, because intelligence is generally a lot of it. I'm not a evolutionary biologist, but it's certainly genetic. You know, how many neurons are firing in your brain, intelligence, and I think it's believed you cannot increase intelligence over your life. You can increase wisdom, there's no doubt about that, but not intelligence. But intelligence comes in many forms. Lorne's not very bright, really. He doesn't seem to have any understanding of human behaviour, and he doesn't really care. It's a combination of things. He lacks that total introspection that Walter had at that moment when he was able to stand back and look at himself. Lorne's a totally different entity. He comes from a totally different background, and he's criminally insane. It's a pity that people like that exist. It's not a shame for him. You don't have to empathise or feel sorry for him because he's made his own decisions, but have understanding for... It's a tragedy. There's part of it that's a tragedy, is that you grow up and you're subjected to really things that are totally out of your control. You've no choice where you were born, how your parents treat you and your siblings, and what happens at school, and the area that you live in, and the social oppression and the mind control that we're subjected to when you watch TV. And I don't mean that in any kind of spooky way. I just mean that, you know, when you're young, you're so malleable. You're watching certain TV shows or reading certain things, it's going to affect the way that you think. It's going to affect your whole psyche and everything. And it takes a lot to break out of that, like Megan Phelps, when, you know, the Westboro Baptist Church, I think I've spoken about that before. She was on Joe Rogan, and she broke out of that church because she had moments of clarity. Despite her being totally mentally conditioned and brainwashed since she was a kid, she was able to step out of it. She had the intelligence and the wisdom to actually say, this is fucking wrong. I don't think Lorne, you see, this is where it gets a bit tricky, right? It's all about a perspective, because I get why people would say, oh, you fucking, you know, making excuses for him. But no, I'm not fucking making excuses for him. You need to shape up if that's what you think, because you're not looking at it the right way. It's about understanding the human condition. It's about... Because if you understand, forgiveness truly arises. Like let's think about somebody who's wronged you. When I had my sort of this sort of breakup, I used to vilify that person. But do you know why I vilified them? Because I was seeing it. I was seeing a total distortion of reality. A total distortion. Oh, that person did that against me because they're bad and they're fucking horrible. And then you'll speak to your friends and you'll tell them the story, but you'll tell them the story from your perspective, and your friends will agree with you and go, yeah, she's a bitch, blah, 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 blah. And generally, your mates will tell you what you want to wear, and they're not your real... Well, it's not that they're not your real friends, they're just fucking stupid. and then that basically sets you on a path of ignorance and non-forgiveness. And it takes a lot. There's nothing more complicated than human relationships, especially romantic ones. So, with regard to, I don't think that he's ever been truly. There will have been a time in prison, I believe, when, I mean, why wouldn't you do? What confuses me is, well, it doesn't confuse me. I understand why he's like he is, but it does every now and again. I think, fucking hell, how does that guy look at himself in the mirror? How does he carry on? Just think if you had that backstory. Just think if you was humiliated like that. But he doesn't see it like we do. Everybody's world is different. Everybody's world, is different. We all have a similar. We all see the world similarly, as opposed to how a fucking grasshopper sees the world. His world is just another dimension, another universe completely. It's crazy. As Lorne's is not the same distance, but it's there. He doesn't see that humiliation. What he sees, of course, there will be an aspect of shame, but he sees it that he was wronged. He sees it generally overall that he was a victim, that he was taken advantage of. From his perspective, he's right. From his perspective, because in his world, he was vulnerable, definitely, but not vulnerable in the way that he thinks. Vulnerable in that he's too stupid to think for himself, and he's susceptible to the law. Basically, he's vulnerable to the law because he'll break it. And he was down on his luck, and he didn't feel good about himself, and he was desperate. So, from that aspect, he's vulnerable. We're all vulnerable creatures, but he doesn't see it the way that we do. He was going to cause somebody harm. He wanted to hurt a child, and everything that happened to him was deservedly so. Totally. He can't see it that way like we do. So his protection from the humiliation is he was a victim. Look at what they did to me. Look at what perverted justice did to me. All that kind of stuff. It's a protection mechanism. And that's what kind of interests me about him. It's like, look at the photo you see on your screen now. It's a comedy. There's a comedic aspect to it. It's like, it is funny. It is funny. And there's a tragedy. And, he is a fascinating character. He really, really is. But anyway, I can't believe I'm still making videos about the same topic 3 years later. But these are the type of videos that I enjoy doing the most. Is really, this deep introspection of the human condition. And anyway, 48 minutes is a long time for this type of video. So I do apologise that I've gone on longer than I could go on for ages about this, but I've got shit to do because it's Saturday. So please leave any comments. Please let me know if you've enjoyed it. I know this kind of stuff isn't for everybody, but generally the people that listen to my videos, these type of videos, they kind of like hearing this perspective. Otherwise, you wouldn't. And that's, generally most people just like listening to this, to the long calls and listening to him fumble around, which is fine. But anyway, so yeah, thank you very much for listening. Please leave any comments at all. Tell me if you agree or disagree. It's not a problem. I enjoy it. I like a little bit of discussion as long as it's constructive. That's cool. So I hope you're all doing okay in these weird times. So yeah, take it easy. Look after yourselves, and I will speak to you soon.